Bishut, everybody, Be'ezrat Hashem, it's actually a big zechut. I'm inspired and privileged to get to speak about Chacham Ovadia. Although I didn't have the zechut to meet him, unfortunately, I have the zechut to know exactly who he is through his writings, Be'ezrat Hashem, and he is my Rav Muvhak, I think. Seriously. And it's very ironic that your Rabbi Muvhak you didn't get to sit with and discuss halakha with. But Baruch Hashem, in my whole path of starting to become religious that I constantly go through, I've had a very, very big connection to the writings and works of Chacham Ovadia. In his many books, I believe there's 55 of his books, V'Bi'omei, Chavedat, Chazon Ovadia. And it's a very, very big zechut. So the truth is, I heard from his son, Chacham Yosef, that Rabbi Ovadia always asked not to say miracle stories. He wasn't into that. He said, if you want to say anything about me, if you want to learn anything about who I am, and really who Rabbi Ovadia was, I don't want any... He said there's many miracle stories. So I'm going to tell you one of them, just because I heard a beautiful miracle story with Chacham Ovadia. But he said, what he wanted us to learn and say over about him was only about his dedication to Torah, his passion for Torah learning, his yediyat Torah, his bikiyut in the entire Torah. Actually, one of the great Rashi Yeshivot said about him that he testified about Chacham Ovadia that he knows close to 40,000 books by heart. And I forgot who it was. I heard this from Rabbi Ozairi. He said one of the rabbis in Baltimore said it. And he said that one of the big chachamim were there and he did the math immediately. And he said that means that for his whole life he had to learn at least one book a day. If you do the math, to know 40,000 books by heart, to learn a book, it's crazy how much Torah Chacham Ovadia knew. And his yediyat Torah is bikiyut. But so I'll tell you one wonder story about Chacham Ovadia. There was once a group of people that needed a minyan. There was 9 of them, and it was almost Shekiyah. They had very few minutes left until the end of time of mincha. And one of the Gabbai of the Beit HaKnesset, he went outside to find the 10th member. And when he goes out, this story was told by his grandson, Chacham Ovadia's grandson, Rav Sinai. And he went and he looked for the 10th guy, and he sees a guy, a delivery boy on a motorcycle with a helmet. He says, hey, come here, please. We need a minyan. He stops him. He says, me and minyanim, we don't go. Please, leave me alone. He says, no, you don't get it. We don't have time. We need a tent. You're Jewish. Come, yeah, get in. We need you. The guy comes in. He takes off his helmet and his whole ponytail comes out. He has like his mane, his long hair. He takes off his jacket. The guy's tattooed the entire arm. And the Gabbai is like, wow, who did I bring you? Because if it's taref to minyan or not. And ironically enough, but another Jew walked in to complete the minyan without this guy. And the Gabbai was relieved. He said, wow. He says, we have a minyan, you could go. And the guy was so brokenhearted. The guy was shattered. And he said, I came to help. And he didn't say a word, but he left. Unfortunately, 2 days later, this guy passed away. The biker. The delivery boy. How did he know he passed away? The grandson said he heard the story firsthand, and he said that the biker came in a dream to the Gabbai of the Beit HaKnesset, and he was extremely bothered. And he said, what happened? He said, Ani toveh otcha bebeit din shel ma'ala al chayecha. He said he's coming to Beit Din and he wants him dead, and he won't relax till, because the zchut of mincha, he said they told him it would have saved him. It would have been enough. And he said, now that I didn't get to pray mincha because of you, you kicked me out. I would have stayed. I came to be the 10th, but you kicked me out. But you told me you didn't need me. It lowered his morale and you walked out. He said, and the guy woke up from a nightmare. And the next night he went to sleep and he had the same exact dream. Now till here, nothing had to do with Rabbi Ovadia, but he went to a rabbi and he said, go to Rav Mordechai Eliyahu. He's one of Gdolei Israel. He'll tell you what to do. Ask him what to do with the dream. And Rav Mordechai Eliyahu was actually out of town. and they told him that he went to the Lishka, the place where he was Mekabel Kahal. He wasn't there. So he asked his rabbi, he said, go to Chacham Ovadia. He comes to Chacham Ovadia's house, and he waits, and finally when he comes into him, Ovadia was there, and he told him the story, and Ovadia started screaming at him. He said, he's right! You should die! You took his life! You could have saved his life! If you could have saved his life, Hashem Yachem, you kicked a Jew out of the minyan. So you should be ashamed. And if he was scared, now Gdol Yisrael is saying this, he was in a bigger nightmare, hearing this from Chacham Ovadia, who was strict when he had to be, but he was also very adin. So he said, to hear this from Chacham Ovadia, it was a nightmare. Chacham Ovadia, before telling him to leave, he said, sit here. He sits down, and Chacham Ovadia starts learning for 2 hours straight. The guy's sitting there, and he's like, what am I supposed to do here? He's watching Chacham Ovadia, and my rabbi told me many times, when he'd walk into Chacham Ovadia, he would stand there probably 20, 30 minutes easily, and he was in another world. He said, you hear stories, but if you didn't see it, he says, you don't understand it. He was literally, there could be the loudest ruckus. He told me many times, Rav Levi told me, that in LA, he arranged there to be a Lavyan, it's very hard to arrange live classes, and he arranged through a projector a live class in LA. So he came in, Rav Ovadia was sick and he was learning, and he said there was a whole crew setting it up. The Rav Ovadia didn't flinch, he didn't move. There were people taking flash pictures. There's a video of Bibi Netanyahu coming in to see him. He's literally waiting there. Chacham Ovadia doesn't even realize. And you have the whole, everybody's taking pictures. He doesn't notice anybody. Anyways, he's there for 2 hours watching Chacham Ovadia diving into Sugya. And he's very worried. He says, what am I supposed to do? What am I waiting for? And eventually the guy fell asleep. And when he fell asleep, in his dream he sees the guy, the delivery boy, once again. And he sees Chacham Ovadia talking to the delivery boy in his dream, telling him, listen, what are you going to get if this guy dies? Yes, he deserves to die. But what are you going to get from it? You're not going to get any zechuyot for it. You're not going to get olam haba for it. Here, at least he could learn Torah for you, Lui Neshama. He could say Kaddish for you. He could learn Torah, do mitzvot, zikuy rabim. He could do endless things for your zechut. It's way better. And then the guy in the dream agreed. He said, fine, if he does that, then maybe I'll forgive him. He woke up and he sees Rabbi Ovadia sitting and learning. And eventually, he told Chacham Ovadia what he dreamt. And he said, listen. He says, if you learn Torah for zechut, then B'ezrat Hashem will be a kapara for what you had to go. And that's what he did. And Baruch Hashem, he lived a longer life. So there's a lot of things that you could see from this story. Again, Chacham Yitzhak said not to say wonder stories, although he had many. But first of all, the fact that you could be here in this world and also be in Olam HaEmet discussing with Beit Din Shemala.
That happened not long ago after he passed away. It's also a little bit like that, but it comes from good source.
So give me 1 second. So another thing that you see from here is that, first of all, what a big zechut. A person praying mincha. Who would figure? A guy just missed one tefillah. You have to understand every mitzvah you do. And every time you enable another Jew to do a mitzvah, to do another mitzvah is a huge zechut. You have no clue how critical that could be for all of Am Yisrael, for a person himself. But, so although that's a nice story, but the main story is, well, Chacham Ovadia used to say always, there's a Mishnah, the 17th Mishnah in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, Rabban Shimon beno Omer, Kol yamai gadalti ben hachachamim, all my life I grew up amongst the sages, Velo matzati laguf tov ela shetika. Didn't find anything that's beneficial for the body, more beneficial for a person, more than shetika, being quiet. And he says, V'kol hamarbeh devarim bevichet. The Mishnah there says, V'ena midrash ha'ikar ela ha'maaseh. The midrash saying drashot is not the ikar, rather acting based on the halachot that you learn, or the Torah that you learn, you should fulfill it. That's the pshat of the Mishnah. But Chacham Ovadia used to say, as a hint, that ena midrash ha'ikar, when you give a drasha, the drash is not the most important thing. Ela ma'aseh. Having a good story is always the key to a good derasha. That's what Chacham Ovadia used to say, and he was very loyal to that drush of his, because if you ever see in the most depth halakha class, he could give stories, and you'd see rabbis, religious people, not religious people, literally for an hour and a half, like mamash, he would overtake everybody in his derashot. It was incredible. So I have a few good stories, beautiful stories that I've heard firsthand from many from his kids, and one from a rabbi I'm very close to, Chacham Gidon ben Moshe. So many rabbis, and we could hear many drashot about Chacham Ovadia's shkidat Torah. Chacham Ozeri said that when Chacham Ovadia went to Brooklyn, he stayed by Rabbi Ozeri. So he came, and when he got to his house, he said, "Where am I staying? Where am I sleeping?" And he said it was an odd question, but he said I showed him his room, and he took him up to the room, and he said, I need a nightlight to learn at night. So he says, "Okay, I have a nightlight." He sees the nightlight. He says, "Yeah, but I don't want to wake up my wife. I don't want to bother her throughout the night. I need like somewhere that it's not going to bother her." So he says, "There's a closet." He said, "Perfect." So he figured the light would be in the closet and he'll be in the room. But what did Chacham Ovadia do? He went in the closet. He says, "You have a chair?" So he gets a little tiny fold-up chair that fits in a tiny little shack. And in the morning, the Rabbanit Margalit, his wife, she came down. And Chacham Ozeri said, I asked her, "How did you sleep? How did the rabbi sleep?" She said, "I slept great, but my husband didn't sleep." So what happened? What was wrong? He said, No, he never sleeps on Shabbat. He says, "Why would I waste Shabbat night for sleeping when you could learn Torah?" So he would stay up the whole Shabbat night many times in his life. He would stay up the entire night. Chacham David said many stories that literally he would stay up the whole night of Shabbat, the whole day. And Motzei Shabbat, he would take out his books and pen and just start writing everything he learned on Shabbat. He write full teshuvot by heart based on what he learned the entire Shabbat. Like photographic memory. Incredible. So that was Chacham Ovadia's Torah learning. But I think a lot of the stories that we hear from Chacham Ovadia, when you learn it, a lot of times we say, "Okay, that was him, and who am I?" But that's not what we should take from the stories of Chacham Ovadia. We are all capable, maybe not on the caliber that he was at, but we all are capable of being Kovei Timna Torah. He always pushed the simplest of people to have set times of Torah learning, especially Halakha L'Maaseh. Everyone is capable of doing it. But really the main thing I want to discuss is that with all the greatness of Torah that the Chacham had, many people don't emphasize the sensitivity that he had for Am Yisrael. And if you look at his levaya, there was literally over 1 million people, one of the greatest, if not the greatest levaya of all time in the history of Klal Yisrael. 1 million people. The police officers there said it was a miracle that people didn't die, didn't get stampeded there. There's 3 people that fainted, and they said it was a miracle. And supposedly one lady gave birth at the levaya, but other than that, Baruch Hashem, nobody was hurt. And that's crazy, because people were on the roof of old buildings that were literally built 100 years prior. And it was a very, very huge miracle that people didn't, like unfortunately what we saw, the tragedy in Meron. And people were stampeded. And the fact that nothing happened, there was mamash a miracle. Nes Galui. And the people that went to the levaya, he said, "Do you see people chilonim?" I was here. I don't know if anybody here was there. My wife was actually there. She was still in seminary when it happened. It was 10 years ago today. And 10 years ago. It was before we got married, 2 years before. And she was there, and she said it was incredible that you would see people with literally no connection to religion crying hysterically. So I heard this story personally from Chacham Gidon ben Moshe, who knows this person personally. Listen to this story, incredible. Very, very emotional story. There was a Chassid, I believe if I'm not mistaken, it was from Gur, Yeshivat Gur. And he was there crying hysterically. And a big rabbi approached him and asked him, he said, "Listen, I don't understand. You're crying as if the Admor, Chas v'Shalom, died." He says, "What do you have to do with Chacham Ovadia?" He was a Sephardi rabbi. You're a Hasidic Jew. No, like, we love you all, we love everybody, but what do you and him have to do with one another? And like, to be so emotional and crying so hysterically, why are you crying? Why are you so touched and so moved? So this Chassid said, "Why am I crying about Chacham Ovadia?" He said, "Let me tell you a story. Listen to this story." He said when he got married, he was a Chassid of Gur, if I'm not mistaken. And he said about a month after his wedding, his Hasidic wife slowly but surely went off the derech completely. Said she stopped wearing tzniut, she stopped with everything. Mama, she left everything. She stopped with nida. She stopped literally dipping in the mikveh. And this Hasid, this boy, he was heartbroken. And he went to a rabbi, and the rabbi said, there's nothing you could do. A woman doesn't go to the mikveh, get. What could you do? Either you convince her, or alamak. He went to another rabbi, same thing. Third rabbi, same thing. Fourth rabbi, same thing. One day he's sitting with his chavuta, and he didn't want to have to share it with his chavuta. But the chavuta realized, like, the guy is not himself. He's a very stark guy, learns very, very seriously. And he's not himself. He said, can you please tell me what's wrong? And he shared. He said his wife, unfortunately, she was very religious, and she left everything, and she doesn't want to dip in the mikveh. And 4 rabbis already said, that's it. So he said, did you go to Chacham Ovadia? And he says, what on earth do me and Chacham Ovadia have to do with one another? And he says to him, so listen, if there's any rabbi that could allow you, give you some type of heter, there's no one more lenient, not that you could allow this, but there's no one more lenient in the world than Chacham Ovadia. So maybe he has some type of kula, and he could find something for you. So he figured he's going to Chacham Ovadia, he's getting a kula, he's allowed to stay with his wife, and things will be okay. But the problem was that to get to Chacham Ovadia's house, he had 3 buses to catch the routes. The highway system wasn't so great back then. And he had to change 3 buses until he gets to Chacham Ovadia's house. He says that he got there 3 hours later. And when he gets to the rabbi's house, it was late at night. The Rabbanit Margalit opens the door. And the Rabbanit says to him, he says, I'm so sorry, but there's no Kabbalat Kahal now. It's late at night. She says, no, you don't understand. I just took 3 buses. It took me 3 hours to get here. Please, I'm begging you. I have a very, very important question to ask the Chacham. I'm begging you, please let me have a moment with him. Let me just ask him a quick question. And she says, listen, he's learning now. You could go stand in the room. When he calls you, you go in. If he doesn't call you, don't bother. She says, okay. The guy went in the room. He stood there for 20, 30 minutes. Finally, the rabbi went to get a book. And he sees, he says, Baruch haba, Shalom Aleichem, sit down. You want a cookie here? He sits. And the guy gets very emotional, and he tells the rabbi, he shared his story. He got married, and his wife was a tzadikah. She was very religious family. And unfortunately, a month into their wedding, she left everything, and she doesn't want to dip in the mikveh. And he says, Chacham Ovadia literally started crying. So the guy doesn't know me, he doesn't know anything about me, and he literally starts tearing. It says the first time he ever met him in his life. And the rabbi said, give me a moment, give me a few minutes. The rabbi went to his bookshelf, he gets a few books. A few minutes later, he says, okay, where do you live? He says, what do you mean? I live 3 hours away. He says, okay, let's go. He says, go where? He says, I'm coming with you. You want to fix this or not? And he's like, yeah, I want to fix it. What do you mean, you're coming to my house? He said, no, Rabbi, you don't get it. I don't have a car. I came in a bus. He said, okay, I've been on the bus. Let's go. The rabbi doesn't know the guy. He went he got in the bus. He said, please, I'm learning. He probably spoke to him here and there. He maybe taught him a few things. But he learned the whole way. 3 hours later, they get home. He gets to his house. When he gets to his door, he's like shivering. He's like, okay, what do I do now? The guy's standing at the door. He says, okay, should I go get my wife? He said, no, I want to go talk to her. Can I come in? He said, you want to come in my house? Please, for sure. No problem. He goes into his house. He puts him on the couch. Now his wife's in the room. He goes to the room. He says, my wife, we have a guest here. He says, what do you mean? Who's here? He says, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. And the girl's like, you think I'm an idiot? Like, you think I fell off the moon? What do you mean, the Rabbi Ovadia Yosef? The chief rabbi says he's in our living room. She goes and she looks. She peeks into the living room. She sees Chacham Ovadia sitting on her living room couch, bawling tears. She looks at her husband, she's like, what'd you do to him? Why is he crying? And she's like getting emotional. She sees the chief rabbi, Chacham Ovadia, in her living room, crying, bawling tears. And she says, why is he crying? I don't know, ask him. Like, talk to him. She looks at the Rav and she says, Shalom Harav, Baruch haba. And he started crying even more when he heard her voice. And he looks at her and he wipes his tears. He says, Biti, Ad Bat Yisrael. Do you know what it is to be a Bat Yisrael, Tzadika and Tznuah? You're married to a Chassid, Tzadik, Yireh Shamayim, a Ben Torah, the biggest zechut a Jewish girl has. So do you know what Ta'arat HaMishpacha is? Do you know what a zechut it is to raise a Jewish home of tzaddikim, of kids who are Yireh Shamayim? And then he starts bawling. He says, how could you not keep Ta'arat HaMishpacha? And she starts crying and she says, Rabbi, please, I'm begging you, stop crying. I promise you, that's it, I'm done with the games, I'm going to keep it, I'm going to keep tzniut, I'm going to stop. He said, promise me you're going to do it. She said, I promise you, I'm going to keep Ta'arat HaMishpacha. I understand what a zechut I have, I don't know, I had yetzara. And the rabbi started blessing her, Chacham Ovadia starts blessing her. And this girl, she starts crying, she's very emotional. And when he's about to leave the room, he gets up. He says, Bezat Hashem, you guys should have a successful home, should have a binyan ade'ad, should be zocheh for dor yesharim evorachim, holy kids, Bezat Hashem. And he's about to walk out, and the guy says, I'm going to walk. I'm going to not walk. Take the chacham home. He says, what do you mean? He says, now you're a new hatan. That's it, stay home with your wife. You have to v'simach et ishto shana echad. And the rabbi left alone. He literally left the house. And this guy was the one crying, the Chassid Gur that was crying at the levaya. He says, you ask me, what do I have to do with Chacham Ovadia? He says, today it's 23, now it's 30 something years after. He says, Baruch Hashem, I stayed with my wife, and Baruch Hashem, we had 4 or 5 kids that are Bnei Torah, that literally are Chassidim, Tzadikim, that sit and learn Torah all day. Rabotai, what rabbi do you know that would take 3-hour bus ride there and back to a person that you don't even know? Some guy asked me the other day to come to his house to kosher his kitchen. I'm like, give me a break. Unfortunately, it's sad to say.
I was really soon. I don't know when I was doing kosher rice in the house.
I literally, the guy was sending me pictures like every dish, and I'm like, okay, this you have to dip, this you have to kosherize, this doesn't need. And I'm like, okay. Baruch Hashem, I helped him somewhat. Yeah, I helped him at the mikveh, tfilat kelim. I didn't go to his house. I told him, meet me at the mikveh, I'll show you what to do. But where's the tip? Where's the money? How much are you going to get? What do I get out of this? Look at what a Gdol Yisrael is, Rabotai. Look at it with his vision. Look at what is his priorities in life? What does he care about? Another Jewish guy that I have no clue who he is, that his wife will keep Ta'arat HaMishpacha. Yes, that means the world to me. That is everything for Klal Yisrael, because that is our legacy. That's who we are. He doesn't care about a penny. Chacham Ovadia grew up in such poverty, you don't understand what he had. He says a story about himself. He writes that he used to learn Maseret Yevamot. He learned throughout one of the wars, I don't remember which war it was, and it was freezing, and there was literally leaks in the roof of water. And he remembers that water was dripping on his head. It was freezing cold. He was shivering, learning Yosef Maseret Yevamot. And he writes that he has psychologically, whenever he'd open that daf in Yevamot, that he remembers, then he had that chill, and he says every time he opens that daf, he gets those same chills. He feels it. He relives that moment. Every time. He would sit day in and day out. His whole class of Poat Yosef would go out to field trips. He would stay back, and they would say, kids in his class testify. They'd come back after a day of a field trip, and he would literally finish a whole Masechet. He finished all of Masechet Gittin. From what? Literally, he would sit and learn Torah his entire life. What happened? Oh. Okay. I have a friend.
Yeah, it's fine.
So,
it's fine.
There's a midrash in this week's parasha. The midrash says that when Noach got out of the teva, Noach started bawling tears. Kobe, you gotta kill him, my friend.
I gotta get.
You need help?
Kobe's not violent. It's not good.
We have an Atzala member if you want.
I don't touch that. So.
You have to ask the Google.
The Midrash says in Parashat Noach that when Noach left the Teva, he comes out of the Teva and he sees an entire world literally destroyed in front of his eyes. And at that moment, Noach started crying and he said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how could you? How'd you destroy the entire world? He started crying. And the Midrash says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, now you want to shed tears? After I destroy the world, you want to shed the tears? He said, I gave you 120 years to build the Teva so you could pray for them to do Teshuvah. And now you want to remember and start praying? There's a similar Midrash about Yirmiyah Navi. And the Mizmor Kuf Lamed Zayin in Tehillim 137. Al Naharot Bavel, Sham Yashavnu Gam Bachinu, Bezochenu Et Zion. It says, Al Naharot Bavel, on the rivers of Bavel, of Babylon, we sat, Sham Yashavnu Gam Bachinu. There we sat and there we cried. What does it mean? Gam, Sham Yashavnu, there we sat and there we cried. Says the Midrash that Yirmiyah Navi escorted Am Yisrael. He was given permission by Nebuchadnezzar to stay in Yerushalayim. But he walked Am Yisrael to Bavel and then he went back. And as he walked into Bavel, he rebuked them the whole way. And he told them, do teshuvah, repent, look, the Beit HaMikdash is being destroyed. I warned you, I told you. And the Midrash says that at that moment, once they finally sat on the river banks of Bavel, and they see the ash and the smoke going up from the city of Yerushalayim, they sat there and finally they cried. And Yirmiyah Navi rebuked them and he said, now you want to cry? What about all these years when I screamed at you and I rebuked you and I told you, Rabotai, do teshuvah, repent, change. Now you want to change and now you want to do teshuvah. So the Midrash has a similar idea about Noach. That after the fact that the Hashem destroyed the world, he sat and he cried. I heard many, many different stories, just similar to the one I just shared about Rabbi Ovadia. That he literally would hear Jews that were afflicted, about almanot, widows, people that were literally, that went through poverty, people that lost their parents, young kids, yatomim, almanot that lost their husbands. And he would sit with them and cry like a baby. And if anybody knows Chacham Ovadia, how precious his time was, to understand the fact that Chacham Ovadia would give a Torah halacha, a class, in Hichot Purim, every single year, the same halachot. The simplest class. Every year, that's Mesirut Nefesh for Chacham Ovadia. Because what he was capable of learning in a minute. My rabbi, Rav Moshe Avital, he was zochet to be in his yeshiva, in Or Chaim, which was opened by Rav Elbaz. Rav Reuven Elbaz was very close to Chacham Ovadia. They would have classes of Chacham Ovadia Be'iyun for Bnei Torah. So we have been zochet to hear many of his classes for Balibatim, which also he'd have incredible depth and he would simplify everything in the most incredible way ever. He would give mashalim and stories for every single person in the room to understand and to literally be mesmerized. But when he would give shiurei Torah for Bnei Torah, my rabbi told me he couldn't. They would give you Mareh Mekomot. He would give you 40 different books that you have to open before, and he would quote them, and he would literally go through them, and he would give such an in-depth halakha class. Something incredible. And for Chacham Ovadia to be able to sit and give us shiur Torah to Balei Batim, to simple people, at such simple level, it was literally Mesirut Nefesh for Chacham Ovadia. It was incredible. Yet this same Chacham, he would go and give shiurei Torah. Chacham David and Chacham Yitzhak would say, when he went to Shidduchim with Rabbanit Margalit, you know how he would go to Shidduch dates with his wife? He would usually do them on Shabbat, and he would go and on Shabbat he would pray early, and after his tefillah, he would give a shiur Torah at the place he would pray. Immediately after, he would walk to another Beit HaKnesset and give a new halakha class, completely different. He would never repeat the same one. He had 7 shiurei Torah on Shabbat back to back before he'd go home and eat. 7 shiurei Torah in Beit Knesset in the same city, one to the next. He'd go, he'd walk, and give shiur Torah. From shiur to shiur, Rabbanit Margalit would come to listen to his class. I did the same thing on my shidduch with my wife, by the way. And she would come to my classes, Baruch Hashem. And what happened? I would go, just kidding. Chacham Ovadia would go from one class to the next, and on the walk between one class to the next, he would go, and that's when he would talk to his wife on his shidduchim. Look at this shidduchim, ishtabach shemolad, what he would do. Her dad was Rabbi Avraham Fatal, a very big Syrian chacham. And Chacham Fatal, Chacham Ovadia was actually very late in shidduchim. Nobody wanted to date him. He got married at the age of 24. And Rabbi Azratiyah, when Chacham Avraham Fatal came, he said, I want your best ilui in the yeshiva. He says, I have him for you, but you should know that this guy, he's not from this world. He's on another level. And Chacham Ezratiyah, the Rosh Yeshiva of Puat Yosef, said that he is on another level, but he's extremely poor. He doesn't have a penny in his name. And he's extremely, extremely poor. But I guarantee you, if your daughter marries him, you won't regret it. He will be one of the next Gdolei Ador. And he said, okay, I want to meet him. So he comes to go on the first shidduch, and when he comes to the house, the father of Avraham Fatal, was a huge Talmid Chacham, he said, I wanted to test him. So they started talking in Limud. He started asking Yichot Brachot, and then Yichot Shabbat, Yichot this. They start talking for 3 hours, and it goes into late hours of the night. And at the end, the girl's waiting there to go on the date. Just picture this. If I would come, I remember when my father-in-law, I came to the house, Shem Elochem, what we spoke about. What's shiur Torah, halacha. If I would have came and talked to my father-in-law for 3 hours before I even met my kala, you get booted on the spot. So, okay, they didn't go out the first night. He came back the next night, and once again, the same thing happened. It repeated itself. That night, the daughter said, that's it. He doesn't want to date me. I don't want to date this guy. And she said, that's it. I don't want to go date him. And he said, no, please, I beg you, next time I won't talk to him. Please go on a date with him. Please, you don't understand what a high caliber this guy is, who he is. He's a huge Talmid. Please, I'm begging you, date him. And she said, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not going. Go tell the rabbi that Chacham Ezratiyah, I'm not going. Chacham Fatal went to Puat Yosef, and he saw Chacham Ovadia, and he says, listen, I'm so sorry, but my daughter, I'm begging her, but she is traumatized. She doesn't want to go on a date. He says, no, I have to go at least on one date, please. He says, tell her I'm coming tomorrow, and I'm not going to talk to you. I'm coming. I need one date with her. And they went on the first date, and on that first date already, he told her, listen, I'll tell you what I want in life. I want one thing and one thing only. I want a life of Torah. I want to be Gdol Yisrael Haba. I'm going to be Gdol Yisrael. And my dreams are to publish many, many books, and that's what my whole life is going to be about. And I need my Ezra Kenegdo. I need somebody to help me and support me. And I promise you, and I guarantee you, if you are that one, you won't regret it. You will be, everything I learned is half and half, me and you. And Baruch Hashem, she took him on the offer, and she was zochet to have shtabach shemolad, a lot of holy kids, Baruch Hashem. Rishon LeZion, some say the next Rishon LeZion. His firstborn, Rabbi Ariel Yosef, who passed away prior to Chacham Ovadia, Alav Shalom. He passed away 6 months before Chacham Ovadia. At the Levaya, at the Shiva of Chacham Yaakov Yosef, when he sat in his Levaya, and Aver is Asur b'Talmud Torah. I heard the story from Chacham Ozeri, and I read it by many Chachamim write the story, that the halacha says that an Aver is Asur b'Talmud Torah. Chacham Ovadia sat there, and in the Levaya on the third day, 2.5 days passed. Third day we came in, and he sits there. They sat in Aliyat Gag. The kids sat Shiva down there, and on the second floor he sat, and only Gdolei Yisrael would come up to him. And Chacham was there. He said he was welcomed up to go up there, because he was very close to Chacham Ovadia. And when he got into the room, he said, he was talking to Gdolei Yisrael. People were talking to him in Limud, or whatever, comforting him. He said, I saw, without exaggerating, 20, 30 books open. And every few seconds, Chacham Ovadia would look in. He's an Aver. An Aver is Asur b'Talmud Torah. He said, Chacham Ovadia said, I looked at the books. He said, I looked to see what he's learning. Yichot Avelut, Yichot Shiva, what is it? Onen, something. He said there wasn't one book there on Avelut. He was learning in-depth halachot. And he said, I was mind-boggled. I didn't understand what was going on. And the Maharam Yoteber, if I'm not mistaken, he writes already, there's few Rishonim that say that Gdol Yisrael is someone who really nafsho chashka b'Torah, and they write, and it's karov lepikuach nefesh. If he doesn't learn Torah, he's allowed to learn Torah. So when he came down, he asked the other sons, he says, you know what your dad's learning up there, right? And they said, yeah, he's different. He said, what do you mean he's different? He said, he told us a few times. He said, if I don't learn, he said, it's mamash pikuach nefesh. I heard this in the Levaya, in the Shiva, from Chacham David Yosef. Chacham Ovadia, there was a war, actually, that broke out right before he passed away. And there was a Gzerat Giyus. They were trying to get all the yeshiva bachers to go to yeshiva. And Chacham Ovadia fought with it, literally put his heart in it his whole life. And he was extremely, extremely sick at the end of his life. He had many, many surgeries. He was extremely sick. And he said, Chacham David Yosef said, the last words he heard from his father's mouth, he says these were his words. He said, with tears in his eyes, he woke up from a coma, or a semi-coma, and he woke up and he had tears in his eyes. And you literally saw, the image was, he was literally on machines, and there was a book someone would hold in front of him, and that was the image. That's it, he couldn't even talk. And there was a point where he was in such excruciating pain, and he couldn't even learn. And he said the last words he said, with tears in his eyes, he says, Im ani lo yachol lilmod Torah, lama li chaim. Those were literally the last words he said. There's a Gemara that says, Chacham David shared this at the Shiva. There's a Gemara that says that Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan were famously chavrutot. And how did Rish Lakish die? Anybody know? He died because of a kpeda of Rabbi Yochanan, his chavruta. Rish Lakish was a bandit originally, and eventually he did teshuvah. The famous story, the Gemara in Baba Metzia Peidalid, that he was jumping from one side of the river to the next, and he saw what he thought was a woman in the river, and it ended up being Rabbi Yochanan. He thought it was a beautiful woman, and he said Chelach L'oraita, and eventually he accepted on himself all Torah, and he became weak. Ki Torah mateshet kocho shel adam. And eventually they became chavutot, and Rabbi Yochanan was his rabbi, but eventually they became tamid chaver. He was a student, but eventually they came the same caliber of Torah. They were chavutot, not his student. And one day they were learning about Yichot Tumah and Tara of knives, and Rish Lakish said something to Rabbi Yochanan that was a little bit out of place. And Rabbi Yochanan said to him, he says, you know what, you probably know. So he says, you probably know because you were a bandit. And then Rish Lakish answered him and said to him, this Gemara, you have to understand it. It's a very difficult Gemara. I don't have to see the Mefarshim before we understand the depth of it. But he said, you're a bandit. And that second, he threw back a comment that hurt Rabbi Yochanan very much. He said, Maya hanyatli. What did you benefit me? What did you give me in life? Before, they called me a rabbi, and now I'm still a rabbi. That's what he said to him. Meaning before, the pshat, the Mefarshim say is, before I was the head of the bandits, and now I'm the head of the rabbis. So what did you benefit? I was once the chief rabbi of the bandits, and now I'm the chief rabbi of the rabbis. And that second, Rabbi Yochanan was very, very bothered. And the Gemara says, he looked at him and he killed him with his kpeda. And he died. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan literally went crazy after he went. And he would walk in the streets and he'd say, Ba'al Lakisha, Hechat, where are you, Rish Lakish? Where's my chavruta? And they'd say the famous words, O chavruta o mituta. If you don't have a good chavruta, then it's better to die. And so much so that the Chachamim prayed that Rabbi Yochanan should die. And he died. He said literally Chacham Ovadia got to a point where he said he didn't want to live. He couldn't learn Torah anymore. That's how sick he was. He said, Lama li chaim. There's a story I heard from a big Chacham that Chacham Ovadia always had those awesome glasses. Right, the red glasses. It wasn't just the style. It was actually because he really had terrible eye problems and excruciating pains with his eyes. And he went through multiple eye surgeries. And once he had to go to an emergency surgery. He was almost blind. He almost went blind. And they had to go to an emergency surgery. And they wanted to fly him to Italy or France. I don't remember where the doctor was. And they called the doctor up, and as they call him up, the doctor said, "You don't get it. I actually coming for a very important clinic, or very important meeting I have in Israel. I'm going to be there in 2 days." So he says, "Okay, you're coming. Beautiful." They arranged the surgery to be done in Eretz Yisrael 2 days later. When he left the surgery, Baruch Hashem, everything was successful. The doctor told him, "I'm telling you, please, I know you like to learn. I heard that all you do is learn. Please, no learning in small print, and also no learning in the car." Chacham David used to say that he used to get excruciating headaches. It's very hard for me also, when learning in the car, especially on buses in Israel, it's very, very hard. And he said he used to get headaches. And Chacham David said, "Ya Batlan, learn! What are you sitting? Open a book. What are you doing? Why are you wasting your time?" And he says, "Abba, I can't have headaches." He said, "I tell לך ברכה that you shouldn't have tireless." He said, since that day, he gave me Birkat Kohanim. He blessed me, I should be zocher not to have headaches while I learn in the car. And he says, since that day, I'm zocher to learn in the car. Baruch Hashem. Okay? Tzaddik gozer v'kayem. But one day, Chacham Ovadia left literally after the doctor told him he can't do it. And he's sitting in the car with his wife. Chacham Ovadia is sitting like this, with his back to his wife. And he has his Gemara like this on the side. So he had a driver, Rabbi Ovadia, that was with him endlessly. And he's sitting there learning on the side, in small print, in the car. So he just left the doctor. And the Rabbanit says, "Ovadia, what else there?" And he ignored her, he kept learning. And then she says, "Ovadia, no, עכשיו הרופא אמר לך. He just told you, what are you doing?" He says, "מה את רוצה? זה החיים שלי." He literally felt like that. Kiem chayenu be'och yamenu. So for many, we just say these words. But he lived this. This was his life motto. This was everything he had. He lived the Torah Kedosha. So there's something we could take from Chacham Ovadia. It's to learn the mamash, how much he was dedicated and devoted to Torah learning and daily learning halakha l'maaseh. One last story I'll end with to share. I told you this the other day. But this is a very beautiful story that also we see the godel of the Avat Yisrael Chacham Ovadia had, which is something that we definitely have to be working on these days. Chacham Ovadia, 14 years prior to his death, he actually had he was in a coma. He had a heart attack. In the middle of the night, they rushed him to the hospital. And when he got to the hospital, he was literally hooked up to life support, to machines. And when he woke up, this is a very famous story, I'm sure you all know it, but it shows to really understand how much Avat Yisrael this Chacham had. It's incredible. He sat there in the hospital. The second he opened his eyes, he ripped off all of the machines. He stands up and he walks out of the hospital room. And the doctors chase him, and the nurses and everybody and his kids, they're begging, "What are you doing, Abba? Where are you going?" And he says, I have to go home. So no, the doctor right now, we just agreed that you have to go into emergency open heart surgery, dachuf, immediately. We can't go, there's nowhere to go. His life is on the line. I said, no, I'm not doing any surgery. I have to go home, I'll be back in a few hours. Literally, he left the hospital. I'll tell you, approve of that?
Not my job.
It's not your job, okay? He wouldn't have listened to you anyways. And he left the hospital. And Chacham David said, he was with him in the car. He said, Abba, where are you going? What's so urgent? Literally, the rabbi's life is on the line. And he said that he was writing a teshuvah. If you read any teshuvah Chacham Ovadia wrote about agunot. And agunah is a lady that her husband is in a state that she cannot get married. She doesn't know where her husband is, if he's alive, if he's not. And she's not sure what to do. An agunah literally means an anchor. Just like an anchor is planted, it doesn't move. She is also, metaphorically speaking, stuck in her situation. She cannot get married. So he said, I was in the middle of a teshuvah for an agunah. And literally no Gdol Yisrael was willing to take that achayut on their shoulders. You know what an achayut? There's a story of Rabbi Ovadia that had to do this. Either Rabbi Ovadia or Khatam Sofer. That unfortunately once they had to be matir and agunah. And literally a year later, the husband came back overseas, and she got remarried. What do you do? It's crazy. It's something that's unheard of. And he had over hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands, of agunot that he was matir in Milchemet Yom HaKippurim and in many, many milchamot over the years. Also 9/11, he wasn't there, he wasn't actively there, but he helped very much. And he sent many, many teshuvot. Of his teshuvot were the source of many of Chacham David Feinstein and many of the Gdolei Ador that were matir agunot. It was all on the basis of the teshuvot of Chacham Ovadia. But anyways, he came and he said, I'm in the middle of writing a teshuvah of an aguna. And he said, who is going to do it if I go into an open heart surgery and I don't wake up? Who is going to take the achayut to be matir this aguna? Who is capable of doing such a thing? And he said, I have to go and be matir. And he went and he finished the teshuvah and he found enough support for her to get married, and that's what he did. If you read his teshuvot, he says, I'm writing with Dmawat. He said he saw, unfortunately, he said, the worst war that ever happened in the land of Israel was Milchemet Yom HaKippurim, which also was one of the only that happened, which many, many people were taken captive, and many, many people, unfortunately, died. And they had to bring, literally, he said, these Reshaim Arurim Yimach Shemam, they literally, the bodies, the evidence to prove, he says, it's heartbreaking to come and be to look at this body. Right now, Chacham Yosef spoke the other day, and he said right now, he already has received a few teshuvot of, unfortunately, people that don't know what to do. And there's still a few bodies that are unidentified. What do? There's a body that literally you can't identify. You can't see the guy's face. You can't prove. He writes proof upon proof. If you could rely on the diskit, the necklaces that people had. Shulchan Aruch writes that you cannot bring a proof of a person's body from you have to have evidence from his face. You can't bring on kelim, a vessel, because it could be that a soldier, in time of war, another soldier gives him he trades pants with him, he trades this with him. So Chacham Ovadia goes to prove many, many proofs that this is different, because there's this va'at to say that a person doesn't just give over to somebody. This is evidence of who he is, and it's a known thing that, God forbid, if they're taken captive, if the body, God forbid, dies, then they have at least proof of the body. But he said, no, this is different. And he said, but the problem was, a lot of soldiers would put them in their pockets. And pants, people do trade. So he goes and he proves that, no, but people don't give this up. They would, before they give over their pants, they want to lend it to somebody, they would make sure to have this. And he goes through endless psakim and rishonim and achonim. If you look at one tshuva of Chacham Ovadia, it's mind-blowing. If you learn a tshuva in Rabbi Omer, for anybody who's ever learned the shut, Shelot Teshuvot, you could learn a Beit Yosef, and he'll bring you 7, 8, 9, 10 rishonim maybe. Chacham Ovadia goes through teshuvot, rishonim, gmarot, achonim. It's mind-boggling to see how many teshuvot. He once was writing he wrote a book of prosbul. Who knows what a prosbul is? I'm sure you guys know, okay? Very good. Very good. So he was writing he wrote a book on prosbul. They counted how many books he had open on his desk. They counted 400 books open of Gmarot, Rishonim, Achonim, for sources for one little teshuvah he's writing on a prosbul. Who even knows what a prosbul is? There's a few lines. It's Gmar, Gitin, Daf Lamed Vav, Hillel, Tiken, prosbul. A few lines in Shulchan Aruch. It's a few seifim. Who even saw these Rishonim? Who even heard of these? He quotes rabbis, contemporary poskim. That's the craziest thing. That he was also bakir with the Achonim. There's a story with the Shevet HaLevi, Rav Shua Vosner, one of the greatest poskim of our time. And I'll end with this. I say that a lot, I know. I'm sorry, Mo. What can we do? This is the last story. The Shevet HaLevi had a very, very complex sheila they asked him. And they sent the sheila to him, and he says, I'm not on the caliber to answer this. Send it to Chacham Elyashiv or Chacham Ovadia. They go to Chacham Elyashiv. Chacham Elyashiv says, I don't have the shoulders to take the chayut. Go to Chacham Ovadia.
What was the sheila?
I don't know what it was. I'm sorry.
That's the cool part.
That is the cool part. But I didn't know the sheila. They went to Chacham Ovadia, and he said, why don't you go to Chacham, the Shevet HaLevi? And he said, we did.
He said to come to you.
He said to come to you. He says, okay, but he has a tshuva in his shut about it. He brings the Shevet HaLevi's book, he opens it, and he says, take this to him. He forgot about the shoot that he wrote. Sometimes I write notes about Parashat Shavua and I don't remember them. It happens. Okay, maybe Gdolei Yisrael are different. But he literally forgot that he wrote a tshuva about this same she'ela. Chacham Ovadia quoted a contemporary posek of his generation, and he told him where he writes it. He sourced his own book for him. That's incredible. One time they lost a page of Yabia Omer, and Chacham Ovadia was extremely bothered. In the middle of a book, imagine you have a book, Kitveyat, he wrote, you see his printing and his handwriting, it was incredible. They lost the page. They told him what page was it. He got very upset. He literally went and resourced the whole entire page. After a few weeks, they found the page. They went and they matched it. It was Rabotai. They mamash.
Well, he had a photographic memory.
Incredible. He had photographs. He would walk into bookstores and things and read books. Shabash Shemonad. So what we could take from here is not that this is a Gdolei Yisrael that we cannot touch and we're not there. What we have to take from here is that how much he prioritized his Torah, how much he was dedicated, and we all are capable in one way or another. If you did not start a seder on Mishnayot, on Gemara, on Shas, on Chumash, how many of us didn't finish Chumash Rashi? Rabotai, Chumash Rashi, Pshat of the Torah. It's embarrassing. There are goyim that know the Pshat of the Chumash with Rashi. If you did not learn Chumash Rashi ala Seder and you don't know Rashi on the Torah, that's embarrassing. I'm saying to myself, we have to know Rashi, at least to go through Rashi. What about Nevi'im and Ketuvim and Shas Vishtayot and Gemara, Shulchan Aruch? Moshe Weissman Baruch Hashem already knows it all. Vezaz, we should be zocheh. After you give us a bracha, that we should be zocheh also. Vezaz Hashem Abotai, we should be mitchazek in Kviyat Timna Torah and also Avat Yisrael for the schut of Chacham Ovadia and all of Klal Yisrael, Bezat Hashem.